I was talking to a guy at the gym, and he was asking about how did I get to 6'4", and how I explained to him it hasn't always been like this. When I was 14, I had a massive growth spurt when I got to 6 foot, and now I'm trying to get to 6'5". And he was like, "Well, how do you plan to get to 6'5"?" He was quite curious about this because he wasn't massively tall. And I was like, well, I feel like height is 95%, 90% genetic, but there is a kind of 5 to 10% you can control. And I feel like the guy who dead hangs twice a week is going to beat the guy who's always hunched over, and the guy who eats omelets and salmon is going to be taller than the guy who doesn't have the right nutrition for his cells and the right kind of calcium for his bone density, and who one of those people that sort of doesn't eat eggs and is really fussy and eats around the egg than that person. So those I think I got to were the main two, and this is me kind of hypothesizing without much scientific knowledge, but I also think sleep's a factor because I think your cells need to kind of reproduce and sort of build themselves to be stronger and bigger maybe. So although I'm not an expert, I feel like being a tall person and you being a tall person, we have the right to tell smaller people how to be taller.
I don't think that's true. You're chatting out your ass, but carry
on. But I think about I think my points do make sense because if you take someone that doesn't have those, some kid in Zimbabwe who doesn't have the right nutrition, they're not tall, are they? So yeah, give me your thoughts.
My thoughts are, I can see the logic of some of the points you've made, but you didn't choose to be tall. That was given to you by your genetics. Your dad is tall. Your family is tall. The height is literally like pretty much fully genetically determined, right? I think we looked at that in biology in A level because it was like the example we used for a trait that was pretty much fully genetically determined was height. Your point about nutrition is there because let's say you can imagine it that when you're born, there's like a genetic capacity for height, right? But things can get in the way, like malnutrition and like lack of sleep and things like this, and they can limit the extent of that height capacity that you actually reach. And also other things can get in the way. Like, so for example, my mum always tells a story that when I was born, she was told by the doctor that I'd be 6'2", right? Now, I'm not 6'2" if you meet me, but that's a consequence of the fact that I have cerebral palsy and my legs are slightly bent. So I only reach 6 foot. Now, the doctor must have based that on a prediction on, my family history and my genetics. So your point about, eat well, rest, great, right? The posture and height are two different things. You will look taller if you have better posture. But if you're talking to a guy in the gym that is struggling with his height and his small man syndrome, I think he can do as many dead hangs as he wants. Nothing's going to change.
No, because it stretches out your spine.
Yes, Jake, maybe, but that's posture. That's not height. That's appeared height, right? He might be 5'10" when he's fully stretched out, and he exists as 5'8" because he's got shit posture. But that's still posture. It's not his actual height of his body if he's stretched out. So the better response to be is go, well, that's actually not that deep, bro. It doesn't matter how tall you are. If you've got chat and you're doing good things in life, people are going to find you attractive no matter what size you are. Look at Kevin Hart. He's bloody successful. Now, do I like him? Do I think he's funny or do I think he's cringe? That doesn't matter, right? He's still doing well in life and he's like 5'4" or 5'5" or 5'6" or whatever. So it's an interesting one. I like the way that you identify with your height, though. That's what I can feel. It's like you like it and you also feel like it's something you did, which is funny because it's not at all. You know what I mean?
No, but there is a 10 to 5% that is
what are you basing that on?
Rather than nature.
What are you basing that on? Where you got the percentages from?
But I think it's extremely genetic, but the absence of the right conditions will prevent that genetic potential.
Okay, I've just popped into Google, and the AI Google thing just said 60 to 80% of variation in human height is genetic factors. But I do think it's similar to like IQ. Okay, your IQ is very highly genetically determined. Okay, but it's like that. The model I posed with the height example, there's like a capacity for IQ that you've got, And if in a case of like malnutrition or like emotional mistreatment as a kid or trauma or loads of environmental factors like that, the extent that you can manifest that IQ potential is limited by those factors. Okay, so it's similar because that's how there's an effect. Oh, what's the name of it? That's like the global IQ is increasing. Global IQ increase. It's called the Flynn effect, right? So people's IQ on average increases about 3 points per decade. That's interesting, and that's because of the sort of overall economic development, I guess, and people having access to better nutrition and better environments and things. I mean, that's great. So that's what I mean. Like, I can see that. That's why I say I can see the logic in the points you're making about nutrition and rest. I mean, it's just good to be healthy, isn't it? If you're healthy, your body's going to be in a better position, whether that's your height, whether that's your physique, whether that's the way it feels, whether that's your strength, your endurance, all that kind of shit. Just be healthy, ultimately. But also, if you're a small guy, it doesn't matter. Life goes on. You know what I mean? If you're looking to date girls that go, I don't date anyone under 6 foot, they're probably a knobhead anyway. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. Anyway,
I think that's how the world works a little bit, and I identify my height jokingly, but I feel like it's similar to how girls identify with their beauty, in that it's kind of genetic, and it's why I think short people, they're always like a little bit more. Well, actually, I don't want to use a generalization, but some of them, they don't like being short, so they're a bit more sort of angry and feisty. And
there is such thing as small man syndrome, right? It's a term. It doesn't mean it applies to everyone, right? But these things develop because, I don't know, they're like a part of our collective observation as a culture, and then it becomes a joke, right? Where somebody who's smaller in height is a bit more feisty or whatever, or feels like they have to behave or act in a certain way to make up for that fact. But you could say that about any insecurity, right? You could argue that my charisma and my verbal articulation has occurred as a consequence of insecurities around my disability. Because if I'm talking so much and I'm entertaining somebody with my words, maybe they won't notice the fact I'm in a wheelchair or that I walk funny. Like we all have syndromes, in inverted commas. We all have compensations for our insecurities that maybe branch into other areas of our personality and our behavior. But what was I going to say? The thing about when people like judge dating on height, I just think about did I mention this on the podcast? I feel like we did when we talked about the article on the erotic, but the difference in using a dating app and filtering people by their height, by their job, by where they live, by whatever, their haircut, and comparing that to dating somebody in the real world where you feel their energy, you feel their vibe, and you sort of meet them organically. And that being a prime example of left hemisphere thinking in terms of the dating app that separates the person into all these different components, and right hemisphere thinking where you meet the person in their whole context. And I think it is just so, to use my psychology weird brain, is so left hemisphere to go to literally cut out a massive proportion of society. You're just limiting yourself and the available options out there. You know what I mean? Like if a guy's under 6 foot, he's 5'10", but he's a great, caring, emotionally mature guy that has his life together and will like be able to express genuine love and all that. Like you're just putting him off the table because he's like 3 inches smaller than the guy you'd actually want. It's so stupid when you actually break it down.